Actually, the fact that our closest neighbor to the Sun is 4.24 light-years away sounds like very little at first, doesn't it? But to be honest, in the world of astronomy, the word only is the sweetest, but actually the most dangerous lie you can hear. Because that distance we call 4.24 light-years actually means a staggering void of 25 trillion miles, or approximately 40 trillion kilometers. Think about it. If you put a crew on the fastest vehicle humanity has ever launched into space and aimed it directly at this star, everyone in that crew would have been dead for 70,000 years before the ship even reached its destination. And the truly terrifying part is that this distance is actually the easiest part of the journey. If you enjoy these kinds of calm journeys to the edges of the universe that change the way you view reality, you might consider subscribing to our channel and liking this episode if you haven't already. Your support helps these deep explorations, where we try to understand the mysteries of the cosmos, reach more curious minds like a light shining in the dark. Now, please relax. Release your mind from the boundaries of the Earth and float with us among the stars. We are beginning. The real nightmare begins when you try to solve every single problem hidden in the fabric of space. Between us and that distant target, radiation storms that mercilessly tear apart human DNA, engines that can never carry enough fuel to stop, and life support systems that must work perfectly for longer than the lifespan of most civilizations in history. The hardest truth to accept about the universe is not that the stars are very far from us. The real terror is the possibility that even the closest star on the list might still be at an insurmountable distance for the limits of humanity. In August 2016, the European Southern Observatory held that famous press conference that radically changed our passion for the stars. Scientists announced that they had found a planet orbiting Proxima Centauri, the star closest to our Sun. This was not a gas giant or a frozen wasteland spinning in the outer darkness. It was a rocky world, roughly similar in mass to our Earth, located right inside the habitable zone where liquid water could theoretically exist. They called it Proxima Centauri b. This discovery created an electric effect in the scientific world and graced headlines all over the Earth. For the dreams of humanity, the story was almost writing itself. The closest world orbiting the closest star, potentially habitable. It was right next door, in a place we could almost reach out and touch. This news felt like destiny for anyone who had looked up at the night sky and wondered if humanity would one day walk under foreign stars. It was as if the universe had placed a second world at the shortest possible distance and challenged us to go and take it. Now, we no longer had an abstract hope hidden in an impossibly distant, vague galaxy. There was a very concrete destination directly linked to the nearest star system that we could name, study, and turn our telescopes toward. A world where the light reflected from its surface started its journey only 4 years and 3 months ago. A world that fits within the limits of our minds. However, as you know, there is a dark abyss between a goal you can name and a goal you can actually reach. This story is where the invisible gap between those two thoughts turns from an inspiring dream into a much more disturbing reality. When we take a journey in our minds toward that system, we see that Proxima Centauri is actually part of a triple star system that dominates the southern constellation. This system has 2 major members, Alpha Centauri A yellow star slightly larger and brighter than our Sun, and Alpha Centauri b, a slightly smaller and cooler orange star. These two form a pair orbiting each other. However, our target, the third member, is a much fainter and cooler red dwarf. This small star, which has only 12% of the mass of our Sun, revolves in such a distant orbit around the central pair that it takes more than 500,000 years to complete one full revolution. But precisely because of this wide orbit, it is closer to us by a tiny margin than its 2 bright companions. The discovery of this mysterious world was no ordinary coincidence. It was the product of years of careful observations using a technique called Doppler spectroscopy. As a planet orbits its own star, the force of gravity causes the star to wobble very slightly. by measuring those microscopic shifts in the light spectrum. Astronomers at the European Southern Observatory caught a repeating signal at the end of this silent vigil they maintained for months and years, for this red dwarf, which is much dimmer and cooler than our star. This close orbit placed the planet directly into the heart of the habitable zone. However, for us, the real issue is not what is there, but the silent and cruel ocean itself that we must cross to get there. We don't yet know what that famous planet in the Proxima system actually looks like. Whether it has a thick atmosphere or the presence of a strong magnetic field to protect that atmosphere from the freezing cold of space is still a great mystery. It is unknown whether the violent radiation bursts characteristic of red dwarf stars have turned that planet into a bare and dead rock. We don't know exactly if this world is an oasis covered with liquid water and harboring life, or a scorched dark desert. But none of these uncertainties change that fundamental fact that has drawn the attention of the entire scientific world. There is a planet close to the mass of Earth silently spinning right in the habitable zone of our closest star. The temptation to call such a close world reachable is almost irresistible to the human mind. 4.24 light. When you say this number quickly between your lips, it sounds quite manageable. It feels like a very modest figure you might encounter on an ordinary road sign or in the estimated arrival time of a route. Compared to the 100,000 light-year-wide Milky Way galaxy, or our neighbor Andromeda, 2.5 million light-years away, this distance seems like nothing more than a galactic rounding error. It stands like a single small step on an infinite ladder stretching toward the ceiling of the universe. However, a light year is not a unit of measurement designed according to human intuition or the perception of daily life. This term hides an overwhelming magnitude behind a gentle mask that our minds will struggle to grasp. A light year is the distance traveled by light, moving at approximately 300,000 kilometers per second, for a full year without stopping. Thanks to this incredible speed, light travels enough distance to orbit the Earth about 7.5 times in just 1 second. It reaches the Sun in 8 minutes. In about 5.5 hours, it leaves behind the orbit of Pluto, one of the outermost boundaries of our solar system. But after this point, the limits of the scales suddenly begin to change. After passing the most distant objects in our solar system, light now enters interstellar space, which is completely silent and empty. It will take 4 years, 2 months, and about 17 days for the light leaving our sun right now to reach that famous target. If we want to write this distance in the kilometers we know, we encounter a mind-numbing number like 40 trillion. To move beyond mathematical abstractions and grasp what these numbers mean in the physical world, we must remember our standard measure within the solar system, the astronomical unit. 1 astronomical unit is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Proxima Centauri waits silently about 268,770 astronomical units away from us. To see humanity's stance against this eerie void, we must look at our spacecraft. The Voyager 1 spacecraft, launched in 1977, is currently the most distant man-made object in existence. After nearly 50 years of continuous flight, it has managed to get only 165 astronomical units away from Earth. It moves in interstellar space at a speed of about 17.3 kilometers per second. Even at this extraordinary speed of Voyager 1, it would take about 73,000 years to reach its destination. When we evaluate what 73,000 years means in terms of human history, the situation changes completely. This period is about 10 times longer than the entire history of our recorded civilization. When Voyager 1 set out, the entirety of writing, agriculture, cities, empires, science, industry, and spaceflight would barely fit into just the first 15% slice of that long travel timeline. Now let's look at the Parker Solar Probe, the fastest spacecraft humans have built to date. During its closest passes to the Sun, it reaches an incredible speed of 191 kilometers per second. Even with this top speed of Parker, the journey to that star would take about 6,700 years. This period is much longer than the time between the construction of the Egyptian pyramids and the present day. Even if ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and the Industrial Revolution happened 3 times over, our ship would still be floating in the middle of the dark ocean. We are a species that looks at the sky and dreams. However, that freezing and vast void of the universe never stops imposing its own rules. The human mind did not evolve to truly process numbers like 40 trillion kilometers. Abstract numbers lighten the weight of reality and make us feel safe. To internalize the concept of distance rather than it being an abstract mathematical calculation, we must use a different method. Now imagine that we take our glowing star at the center of our solar system and shrink it down to the size of a basketball. In this new scale, the planet we live on Earth would occupy only as much space as a tiny grain of sand. Moreover, this grain of sand would be spinning in the darkness, exactly 26 meters away from the basketball. As we move to the outer parts of the system, things get even more interesting. Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, is the size of a glass marble sitting 135 meters away. Neptune, our outermost major planet, is a slightly smaller marble, slowly orbiting at a distance of 800 meters. This condensed model of our solar system, including everything between Earth and Neptune, all asteroids, moons, and planets, fits inside a spherical area roughly 1.6 kilometers in diameter. Humanity's imagination and scientific achievements were born and grew within this 1.6 kilometer area. So where do our boundary-pushing inventions stand? Voyager 1, the most distant object humanity has produced and launched into the depths of space, has only reached about 4.3 kilometers away from the basketball in our shrunken model. After nearly 50 years of continuous flight, incredible engineering feats, and billions of kilometers covered, this is the furthest point we have reached. A walking distance of 4.3 kilometers. This is where the truly shocking question arises. If we maintain the same scale, where would Proxima Centauri, the closest star we dream of going to, stand? Not at the other end of the room. Not at the end of the street or in the neighboring district. Not even within the boundaries of the city you are in. The target star, with its shrunken proportions similar to the same basketball, would be another sphere, sitting exactly 6,900 kilometers away. This figure is equivalent to the distance between London and New Delhi. Everything humanity has explored, walked on, planted a flag on, or sent a probe to is squeezed into a narrow radius of just 2 kilometers. In contrast, our nearest star is in the darkness, nearly 7,000 kilometers away. This is exactly where we face the brutal reality of space exploration as humanity. The fastest ships we have built, the most advanced probes, and the brightest ideas have not even been able to leave our own front yard in the scale of the universe. The first target we want to go to is literally at the other end of the planet. When you put aside a comforting abstraction like 4.24 light years and bring the distance down to a plane the human mind can grasp, the picture that emerges is this terrifying. Imagine leaving your 2-kilometer yard and starting to walk toward the target 6,900 kilometers away. The void in between consists only of a silence that is completely dark, freezing, and covered with interstellar dust. There is no station you can stop at, no center where you can ask for help, or no stopover point where you can rest in orbit. For the hundreds, perhaps thousands of years it will take to reach the goal, you have to rely only on the machine you built yourself. The laws of physics certainly do not forbid this journey. However, there lies a dark canyon that will take centuries to close between the limits allowed by nature and the engineering realities humanity can achieve. The most important detail to note is that the place we are talking about is only our closest neighbor. No other star around is found this close. Every other corner of the galaxy is incomparably more distant, colder, and more inaccessible. If even the shortest version of an interstellar journey presents such a brutal chasm, the question to be asked now changes. whether Proxima Centauri stands there as a destination loses its importance. The real issue is the limits of any propulsion system that can be made by human hands. The stars are not hiding from us. They simply exist in a magnitude that ignores human life and engineering. Energy is always needed to accelerate. The kinetic energy of a moving object increases in proportion to the square of its velocity. This simple rule of physics turns into a massive barrier when it comes to interstellar travel. If you want to double the speed of your spacecraft, you need to spend exactly 4 times more energy. Imagine that you aim to reach 10% of the speed of light, which is about 30,000 kilometers per second. To reach such a speed, you would need to go 1,700 times faster than the current speed of the legendary Voyager 1. The amount of energy required to bring even an ordinary modest load to this level is not just a lot. It is equivalent to the total amount of energy consumed by all nations in a year. Moreover, this calculation is based on an assumption of absolute perfect efficiency. Energy loss turned into heat is not taken into account. The weight problem created by the fuel itself is completely ignored. Small corrections to be made on the route, or the extra power needed to stop the ship when the destination is reached, are left out of the equation. In the freezing and dark corridors of engineering in the real world, the numbers take on a much more brutal form. As the speed you want to reach increases, the amount of fuel you need begins to push the limits of logic. This is exactly where that dark law of spaceflight appears. The famous rocket equation formulated by Konstantin Tsiolkovsky in 1897 tells a simple truth. There is an unbreakable link between a rocket's exhaust velocity, the mass of the fuel it carries, and the maximum speed it can reach. Increasing the target speed always makes it mandatory for the fuel you need to carry to grow exponentially. Our chemical rockets, which carried humans to the moon and launched probes to the ends of the solar system, produce an exhaust velocity between 3 and 4.5 kilometers per second. Although these rockets look massive for escaping our planet's gravity, they immediately give up when it comes to interstellar distances. In the freezing darkness of deep space, we hit the limits of chemical reactions very early. When we look at more powerful alternatives, the situation still doesn't change. Even nuclear thermal engines, which have an exhaust velocity roughly twice as high as chemical rockets, cannot bridge this mathematical chasm. Even to reach a few percent of the speed of light, when you use traditional rocket technology, the massive fuel you have to carry exceeds your ship's own mass millions of times over. This is not a budget problem. It is not a crisis that can be solved with money, politics, or nations coming together. This is a physics problem arising from the fundamental rules of the universe, directly etched into the math of propulsion. Every kilogram of fuel you add to your spacecraft increases the total weight that needs to be accelerated. You need more fuel to move this increased weight, and that new fuel brings its own weight. Thus, a completely inescapable death spiral begins. The math goes haywire. Equations collapse upon themselves. After a certain point, no matter how much fuel you fill in the tanks, it cannot take you where you want to go. Because the biggest burden of your journey is no longer the spacecraft itself, but the very fuel you have to carry to push it. That is why no realistic interstellar travel concept uses traditional chemical rockets. Every serious project must turn its eyes to much more exotic and dangerous methods: nuclear pulse propulsion systems, fusion drives, antimatter engines, or giant sails pushed by massive lasers. All these concepts serve the same desperate purpose. They try to get out of this brutal mathematical trap either by obtaining an incredibly high energy density from fuel, or by getting rid of the weight penalty created by fuel altogether. The road to the stars is blocked not only by distances but by equations with prices too heavy for our own engineering to carry. Electric propulsion systems, ion engines, and advanced plasma rockets always create great optimism among the public in space research. They represent a real leap compared to traditional rockets. Instead of setting the propellant on fire, these systems accelerate it electrically and eject it at high speeds. The exhaust velocity of a standard ion engine varies between 20 and 50 kilometers per second. Advanced plasma models have the potential to reach speeds of hundreds of kilometers per second. Such a high exhaust velocity means that the fuel carried by the vehicle is used extremely efficiently. The vehicle can achieve a much larger change in velocity with the same amount of fuel. For missions within our solar system, this technology is almost tailor-made. It works wonders in cases where travel times are limited to months or a few years. Consider the Dawn mission carried out by NASA. Thanks to an ion engine, the spacecraft managed to reach and enter the orbits of 2 different celestial bodies in the asteroid belt. It was an achievement that was completely impossible to do with the limited fuel tank of a standard chemical rocket. In places where we are still relatively close to the sun's light within our own safe boundaries, this concept works perfectly. However, when you turn your face toward the deep dark abyss of the universe, the rules suddenly change. The fundamental problem we face is not power, but the weakness of instantaneous thrust. Electric systems produce an extraordinarily low physical thrust relative to the total mass of the spacecraft. The force generated by a standard ion engine is usually expressed in small fractions of a newton. To materialize this weakness in your mind, reach out and place an ordinary sheet of paper in the palm of your hand. The faint lightness you feel on your skin is almost exactly the same as the force trying to push a modern spacecraft toward the stars. Even the most optimistic and advanced designs can only produce a power of a few newtons. Because of this incredibly weak thrust, spacecraft build their speeds very slowly. To reach the desired speed, the engines must be fired continuously for months or even years. In the unforgiving nature of the interstellar void, this situation creates a devastating timeline problem. Even at the highest limits that electric propulsion performance can reach, the picture is not very bright. To reach only 1% of the speed of light, that is, about 3,000 kilometers per second, it is necessary to run the engines non-stop for decades. 10% of the speed of light is considered a practical lower limit for a manned journey to the nearest star. Trying to reach the target with ion engines requires the engines to work at full capacity continuously for centuries. A system working non-stop for such a long time collapses the limits of engineering. The electrical energy required to feed the systems is far beyond the capacity of any reactor the ship can carry. Interstellar travel concepts that rely on brute force eventually turn into an engineering nightmare. Let's materialize the energy requirements of a manned interstellar mission, a theoretical spacecraft initially weighing 50,000 tons. The figure may seem quite exaggerated at first glance. However, we must take into account the equipment that will keep a crew of hundreds of people alive for decades. Life support systems that will work continuously. Heavy radiation shields to stand against endless cosmic rays. Closed-loop farming areas, repair infrastructure, and large housing modules constitute only a small part of this weight. Moreover, this 50,000 tons only represents the dry mass where the crew is located. Accelerating such a heavy mass to 10% of the speed of light requires an incredible transfer of kinetic energy. The power required just to get to the target speed pushes the limits of logic. Rakamlar, insan alge, s, nauigunhale, getirmaksu, ingizagenimis, geride. Imagine all the power plants on Earth. Let's bring together the total power produced by all coal plants, all nuclear reactors, all hydroelectric dams, wind turbines, and solar panels. When we add up the full capacity energy production of all humanity for 1 year, the resulting figure doesn't even come close to the propulsion power needed by our spacecraft. Just the acceleration and deceleration maneuver, when the destination is reached, is equivalent to exactly 78 years of all energy production on our planet. We would have to spend every single watt of energy produced by our civilization for 78 years just to launch and stop a single ship. The real scary part is that the kinetic energy calculation is just the beginning. Kaba Kavit Cosmic Boslagan Karzasanda, Temamin Karesis, Kali R. in PX. Physicists working at General Atomics Laboratories put the first serious deep space design on the table. The project's name was Orion. The concept was based on exploding nuclear bombs right behind a massive pusher plate placed at the rear of the spacecraft. Each explosion would hit this giant plate and launch the ship forward with violent impulses. It was incredibly crude mechanically, but a completely valid approach in terms of physical principles. Analyses showed that a speed of 6.7% of light could be reached with a pure nuclear vehicle. This speed could ensure arrival at the nearest star system within about 130 years. However, beyond the obvious political and environmental impossibility of launching a spacecraft by constantly exploding nuclear weapons in our atmosphere, the real problem was the scale of the vehicle itself. The designed ship would weigh 100,000 tons and would have to carry millions of nuclear pulse units. The engineering challenges that emerged were jaw-dropping, even for a civilization with nuclear arsenals. In the 70s, the Daedalus project, carried out by the British Interplanetary Society, took old nuclear ideas and made them much more refined. High-power electron beams would be used to fire special nuclear fuel pellets, creating hundreds of small fusion explosions per second. The design required a massive spacecraft weighing 54,000 tons at takeoff. Daedalus was an unmanned probe to be launched toward its target 6 light-years away and had an estimated flight time of 50 years. However, when going into the depths of the Daedalus project, the fusion fuel the ship would use was a substance that almost did not exist on Earth. The designers proposed an extraordinary idea. Massive balloon platforms would be established in Jupiter's toxic atmosphere, and fuel mining would be done there. This fuel extraction process alone was a civilization project and required technologies that we don't have. Moreover, the Daedalus ship would not be able to stop when it reached the star it targeted. There was no capacity in the design to slow the ship down, put it into orbit, or perform detailed analysis. This ship was no different from a blind bullet launched toward the stars. Incredibly fast, unimaginably expensive, and destined to pass its target and disappear in the infinite darkness. Years of work and massive resources consumed were just to take a look at the target for a few hours and then move away forever. The most brutal picture we face when designing a ship takes shape right here. Going to the stars is always associated with acceleration. But if you want to do some work there, you have to stop. The deceleration process requires you to spend exactly the same huge energy you spent to accelerate, this time in the opposite direction. None of the exotic projects we have give us a safe return ticket, let alone returning. They don't even allow us to stop when we arrive. Our dreams push the doors of physics, but the void behind those doors imposes its rules mercilessly. Nuclear fusion propulsion remains the most promising theory left on the table for practical interstellar travel. Theoretically, a spacecraft powered by fusion could reach massive exhaust velocity. This could pull travel times below centuries and even allow a complex mission involving deceleration to occur within human lifespan limits. However, applied fusion is one of the most challenging and yet unsolved engineering crises on our planet. As of now, no laboratory or international facility in the world has been able to realize a continuous fusion reaction capable of producing more energy than it consumes. Take the ITER project, the largest experimental facility in human history being built in southern France. This massive facility, carried out jointly by 35 nations, is struggling with constant delays and massive budget overruns. Moreover, there is a terrifying engineering gap between achieving a controlled reaction in a stationary research facility and transforming this technology into a light, compact, and spaceworthy engine. Antimat, itkisi I spectrumun, ok dahau, birnoktas, endadurur. When matter and antimatter collide, they completely destroy each other, and 100% of their mass turns into pure energy. This is the highest energy density physically attainable. However, when put into practice, this dream turns completely into a nightmare because the amount of antimatter, humanity has produced in all particle accelerators in its history is in the level of 1/1000th of a gram. In recent years, the project that has gained the most place in the public mind has been breakthroughs. They approached space travel with a completely different philosophy. They argued that the only way to get rid of that deadly weight cycle of carrying fuel on the ship was to leave the fuel entirely on Earth. The idea was extremely elegant. A massive laser array to be built on the Earth would push a small sail launched into space. Directed energy of billions of watts would focus on a reflective sail a few meters wide and launch the microscopic starship in the middle of the sail forward. Photon pressure applied by the laser would bring this miniature probe to 20% of the speed of light in just minutes. If everything went according to plan, this microscopic vehicle would reach its target in 21 years. There was no trouble of carrying fuel, no weight, and no intention of slowing down. It would take photos in a very short time of a few hours while passing through the system and continue on its way toward infinity. The design had reduced an interstellar mission to the barest and most minimal form. However, even this most simplified vision hit an unprecedented obstacle. That massive laser array on Earth had to focus as much power as dozens of large nuclear plants could produce perfectly onto a 4-meter target millions of kilometers away. In 2025, the project was suspended for an indefinite period after spending only a very small part of the committed budget. There was no failed vision. It was just a matter of imagination hitting an engineering wall that money could never solve. Moreover, the Starshot project was never designed as a manned mission. A ship to carry humans must be a massive structure with fuel, armor, living space, and deceleration mechanisms. And this is exactly where the mathematical reality of interstellar planning, the weight paradox, comes into play. If you launch a spaceship today, with the current technology you have, the journey will take a very long time. However, because technology will continue to develop, a faster and more modern ship launched 50 years later will catch up with your ship on the way and arrive at the destination before you. According to this logic, the most rational decision is always to wait for a better engine. But if you apply this logic constantly, you can never set out. Humanity has remained right in the middle of this deadlock. Speed was only the most visible problem. But the moment you solve the speed problem, a completely different category of challenges that faster engines or more powerful lasers can never solve knocks on your door. These problems are rooted in the fragility of the human body and the limits of human psychology. A small probe doesn't eat, doesn't breathe, and doesn't get cancer from cosmic rays. It doesn't experience loneliness, anxiety, or depression. But in a manned mission, everything starts with radiation. Interstellar space is saturated with high-energy particles, or galactic cosmic rays, that ionize atoms, break molecular bonds, and damage DNA when they hit biological tissue. Our planet's magnetic field and atmosphere are a natural shield that protects us from this constant bombardment. But when you step into interstellar space, you remain naked and vulnerable beyond any planetary magnetic field. During a 40-year journey at 10% of the speed of light, each member of the crew will be exposed to a cumulative dose of between 16 and 24 sieverts. Considering that a single sudden dose of 5 sieverts is considered lethal for about 50% of untreated individuals, continuous exposure increases the risk of cancer hundreds of times above the baseline level and causes measurable cognitive damage, that is, brain aging. Shielding against this deadly bombardment creates its own paradoxes. Adding conventional shielding can actually increase the dose the crew receives rather than decrease it. Because cosmic rays create even more dangerous secondary particle showers when they hit dense shielding materials, calculations estimate that even to reduce the interstellar cosmic ray dose by only 50%, it is necessary to surround the entire habitable volume of the ship with a shield, equivalent to 20 to 30 centimeters thick water. This means hundreds of tons of extra mass, which deepens the propulsion problem we already can't solve. The ship becomes too heavy to move as it tries to protect us from radiation. Life support is another trouble entirely. Even the ISS is vitally dependent on regular cargo missions from Earth. An interstellar ship has none of these safety nets. There are no resupply missions, no spare parts from Earth, and communication with mission control faces a one-way delay of years. A message sent from a ship going to Proxima Centauri takes more than 2 years to reach Earth, and the response takes just as long. The biosphere, to experiment in Arizona, showed how extraordinarily difficult it is to create a self-sufficient closed ecosystem even on the surface of the Earth. The system collapsed. Food production in space is one of the most complex layers. A bad harvest season in an interstellar ship means the crew gradually begins to starve to death. Medical care brings problems that have no parallel in current spaceflight experience. Surgical capability in space is at a primitive level, and in a zero-G environment, blood does not collect in a wound but instead forms floating globules that contaminate the cabin atmosphere. A contagious disease in a closed environment can spread to the entire crew in days, and every medical limit turns into a potential death sentence. Human psychology under extreme isolation is another dark barrier that can be the silent killer of a mission. To be detached from Earth for 40 years, to know that everyone you left behind is aging and dying, and to observe the events on Earth only as ghostly echoes arriving years later, steadily erodes the mind. Mechanical reliability in interstellar timescales presents a challenge never before encountered in human engineering. A manned interstellar ship is not a passive probe floating in space. It is a city in a bottle. With its pumps, valves, and electrical networks, everything wears out and fails over time. In an interstellar ship, every spare part must either be carried or manufactured during the journey. The failure of a critical system leads to a slow, agonizing reality. When the journey spans decades, engineering problems quietly turn into management problems. Who will command the ship? Will a military-style hierarchy turn into authoritarianism? The concept of a generation ship brings deep moral questions. Is it morally acceptable to build lives where there is no possibility of visiting the world or choosing a different path? The psychological weight of a generation imprisoned in a metal box in the middle of infinite void against their will may be the heaviest price of interstellar travel. Hibernation or suspended animation is currently more of a hope than a plan. Keeping a human in a deep sleep for 40 years is far beyond our current biology. Let's imagine that every possibility was challenged and every obstacle was overcome. The spacecraft finally slowed down and settled into a safe orbit around Proxima Centauri. But what exactly is in front of these passengers? As of 2026, we don't have a definitive answer. All we know is that the planet revolves within the habitable zone of its star. But that doesn't mean there is breathable air there. Proxima Centauri is an active flare star and regularly spews deadly radiation into space. The planet is likely tidally locked, meaning one hemisphere always looks at the sun, while the other is imprisoned in eternal darkness. This world could be an oasis with oceans or a dry piece of rock completely stripped of life. For the crew, this situation is the final seconds of a grand gamble where everything has been sacrificed. When we look at the whole picture, the picture we face is of a complexity that tires the mind, but this is not proof that interstellar travel is impossible. The laws of physics do not forbid this journey. The real issue here is the engineering gap between the limits allowed by physics and the realities that human institutions can actually build. This is a deep canyon that could take centuries to bridge. We haven't sent humans to the moon's surface since 1972. And while we are still struggling to go to our own satellite, we are talking about increasing the distance by about 100 million times. Reality is not just that the stars are far away. Reality is that even the closest target has already far exceeded all the capabilities of our civilization. This journey requires a civilization transformation rather than just a technological development. Our current situation is like a tribe standing on the shore of a vast sea, dreaming of the opposite shore but not even having learned how to build a raft yet. The opposite shore is there, but what is needed to get there is still beyond even our dreams. When you look at the sky tonight, imagine that small red star somewhere on the southern horizon. Proxima Centauri is our closest port in a vast ocean of void. This distance reminds us how big the universe is and how precious our place is within this magnitude. Perhaps this massive distance is a physical law we must follow until our civilization moves out of its infancy and becomes true star travelers. It is a door not yet opened, but our minds will always manage to pass beyond those doors. Now, release yourself by thinking about this magnitude of the universe and that deep silent void between the stars. Just like the infinite peace hidden behind the term light year, you too are leaving all the tiredness of the day behind. Your mind is moving in the darkness like a calm ship floating in interstellar space without encountering any resistance. The immense and peaceful darkness of the universe covers you like a blanket. Your body gets heavier, your breath calms down, and your mind gets lost in a cosmic silence. There is no longer a speed problem or an abyss to be crossed. You are just in that moment where your existence is in harmony with this infinite void. Continue to glide toward the frozen but peaceful silence beyond the stars. Let the scale of the universe give you a sense of belonging and trust rather than fear. Because we, after all, came into existence from the dust of these stars, and now we are returning to that silence we belong to. Let your mind empty. Let the darkness deepen. Good night.